vain expectations, the misery and its effects. The white slave trade was a critical international social issue, a chain of crimes perpetrated across country borders, organized illegal trafficking of women and minors to be enslaved, miserable, commodified victims. This criminal phenomenon comes from the first globalization of the second half of the 19th century, which had improved the transport network, thus facilitating travel in Europe and America, and also from the impact that the Industrial Revolution had produced in European social and economic life, such as the urbanization of the population, the increased mobility, and also the pressing demand for cheap labor. Shortly thereafter, the trafficking of women took advantage of the spaces of illegality that these factors allowed. Thousands of girls left in the hope of improving their social status, trusting in a job as a maid or waitress or in a profitable marriage. All this, however, constituted a perfidious deception. These women were persuaded to leave their hometown to escape misery by means of two tricks: a false job offer or a false marriage proposal. They were transported from one place to another. They were drugged, so they were not conscious of what was happening, and then they found themselves living in a prostitution market. They were now part of a system of women destined for sexual commodification on the street or in brothels, continuously transported from one country to another. Other times, they did not end up in the prostitution market directly. In fact, these economic migrants went to perform humble and underpaid jobs, being exploited without the possibility of redeeming themselves, because in general they did not know the language or the places to get accommodation and assistance. Poor and unemployed women, alienated from society, completely isolated, in the end, the resulting emotional frustration made them absolutely vulnerable. They became easy targets for traffickers, who, taking advantage of their socio-economic conditions and their desperation, managed to persuade them to prostitute themselves. There is not a single type of victim. It could interest both naive young girls and women fully aware of the market to which they would be destined. According to the international legislation of the time, the offense was configured exclusively where the prostitutes were of a minor age, instead of considering the woman, regardless of her age, of course giving more regard to minors, but as a victim of sexual exploiters. Three specific types of traffickers are identified. On one hand, the classic souteneur lured the girl for sexual exploitation. On the other hand, however, there was the one who was not directly involved, but who came to deliver the victim. Last but not least, those who were not directly responsible for the exploitation of women, but definitely contributed to it, such as parents who abandoned their children, men who seduced and abandoned their girlfriends, and finally the keepers of closed houses. Three ruthless phases characterized the trafficking. Solicitation was the first phase of the trafficking crime. It was the moment in which the victim came into contact with the trafficker. The illegality of the white trafficking resided and found its strength in the second phase of the crime, that of trafficking, the removal of the victim from their hometown and transported to a state. In most cases, the movement took place across the sea. The victims departed from the port and arrived in Europe, America, the North African states, and also to South Africa. The third phase of the crime of trafficking is the exploitation, that could be of sexual or working nature. The categories subject to manual exploitation were those jobs that required unspecified labor available at low cost. The minimum wage included a bed in an employment house. As for sexual exploitation, on the other hand, it occurred because the existence for brothels was not only tolerated by almost all European states, but was considered to all intents and purposes a legal activity necessary to control the sexual impulses of men. In the 19th century, luring by deception or act of violence was considered to all intents and purposes a crime. On the contrary, if the prostitute had spontaneously surrendered to the keeper of the closed house, the practice was authorized. Britain fought against the white trafficking. English philanthropists have been interested in the issue since the abolitionist campaign in 1885, following which the National Vigilance Association (NVA) was founded. Starting in 1919, they were continued within the League of Nations (LON) with a careful program of fighting against this abomination. However, even today, the trafficking of young women is widespread in every part of the world. It is a dreadful situation that does not respect basic human rights. You are nobody. You are nothing. You are treated worse than an animal. You are a commodity. Take action and let's stop this!